The arena was silent. Tens of thousands of aliens stood around the circle of sand, waiting. The wind howled softly through the high metal towers of the imperial city. A bright red banner dropped from the royal balcony, signaling the beginning, and then he stepped out, a single human, wearing only simple black armor, carrying an earth-forged steel sword. He looked so small compared to the giant who stood across from him. That giant was exotic. The champion of House Veloth, 12 feet tall. His body covered in living armor that shimmered like oil. He had crushed over 50 warriors in public combat. His fists could bend stone. His roar shook walls. Everyone in the crowd whispered, "This human is going to die. He doesn't even have armor. He's doing this for fame, not honor." High above, from the royal box, the princess of House Veloth watched. Princess Veloth was tall, proud, and cold-eyed. She crossed her arms and smirked. She didn't want to waste her time watching a human die in 5 seconds, but then the human spoke, just for words. "I'll make this quick." Gasps filled the arena. Exotic roared in fury and charged forward like a beast. The sand shook under his steps, but the human his name was Dax didn't move. He just waited, his sword still at his side. Closer, Exotic lifted, his giant war axe ready to split the human in half, and then like lightning, Dax moved just one step forward, one slash so fast no one saw it clearly. There was no sound, only the slow, horrifying moment of silence. Then the crowd screamed. The champion's body split open, clean down the middle. Blood and smoke spilled into the sand as Exotic dropped to his knees and collapsed. Dead. It was over. In one strike, the human had cut the unstoppable champion in half. Everyone stood in shock, even the guards up in the royal balcony. Princess Veloth rose from her seat, her face pale. She didn't speak. She didn't move, because she remembered something. A law. Written long ago, forgotten by most. A law passed during the old wars. A law that said, if any outsider defeats the champion of House Veloth in ritual combat, he shall be granted royal right of claim. That right shall include the heir and her sworn handmaidens, unless she is already taken by bond or vow. Everyone turned toward the princess. Even her handmaidens looked terrified. One of them whispered, "Is it true? That law?" A royal judge appeared, holding an old scroll in both hands. He opened it and read the words aloud, and yes, it was true, by their own ancient law. The princess and her maids now belonged to the man who had killed their champion. They were now by law his royal concubines. Princess Veloth's lips trembled. Her pride burned. She had never even spoken to a human before. Now she would be forced to live under one. To obey him, serve him, or face exile or even death. The crowd began to murmur. Some laughed, some were outraged, others were simply in awe. The human didn't smile. He looked confused. He walked over to the judge and asked, "What does this mean?" The judge, nervous, explained the law again in the human's tongue. Dax's eyes widened and he stepped back. "I didn't come for women," he said. "I came to protect my people." But law was law, unless the princess herself stood and declared him unworthy and challenged the Loshi, would be forced to follow him. She didn't move. She couldn't. Her maids bowed their heads, defeated, and so, in front of thousands. A human warrior who never wanted power won something more dangerous than a crown. He won the right to command the heart of a royal house, and the princess, still frozen in her seat, swore silently that she would find a way to destroy him because, no matter what the law said, she would never belong to a human. But deep inside, a small voice whispered, "Then why did he let you live?" The royal courtroom was in chaos. Guards shouted, elders argued, and the princess stood frozen in the middle. She could still see it, the moment Dax's sword sliced through her champion like soft fruit. Her hands were shaking, though she hid them inside her long sleeves. Dax stood beside her now, silent and confused. He didn't understand this place, these rules, or why everyone kept looking at her like she was already his. The courtroom was filled with angry nobles. They demanded the law be broken. "This is madness," one cried. "A human cannot claim royalty," shouted another. But the oldest scribe stepped forward with the scroll, his hands trembling. "This law was written during the burning wars," he said softly. "In a time when strength was more valuable than blood." He held up the yellowed parchment. "Any outsider who defeats the house champion in ritual battle shall have the right to claim a royal bond with the heir and her sworn maids." He looked at Princess Viloth and added, "This law has never been removed." For a moment no one spoke, not even the high priest, who usually had the final word. Princess Viloth stepped forward slowly, her voice cold, then remove. "It now," the court gasped, but the elder shook his head. "It cannot be changed now, only before the duel, not after." Viloth clenched her jaw. Her pride screamed inside her. She had trained in diplomacy, in swordplay, in leadership, but she had never trained for this. Beside her, Dax spoke softly. "I don't want anyone forced to come with me." The room fell quiet. Even Viloth looked at him with surprise. He continued, "Where I come from, we don't own people," the nobles hissed, offended. "Then decline the right," one said. Dax looked around the room, filled with angry faces, and replied, "If I decline, will she be safe?" The priest answered, "Darkly, no. She will be seen as unbonded and shamed. Many houses will seek to take her back through force or arrangement." Dax turned his eyes to Viloth. "You hate me," he said, "but I won't let them treat you like something to pass." Around Viloth's throat tightened. No one had ever said that to her, not even her family. For a moment, she remembered being a child crying in the cold halls of her palace. No one came. Now a human warrior she had just met spoke as if he already protected her, but that didn't change anything. She raised her chin. "I will follow only by law, by choice," she said, "and never from the heart." Dax nodded. "That's enough for me." The judge stepped forward and declared the ruling. "By law of the High Scroll, Princess Viloth and her 5 sworn maids shall follow the victor Dax. Of Earth, they are to obey him as bondservants, unless they choose another way under the right of rejection within 30 moon cycles." Gasps again filled the room. The right of rejection. It was rare and dangerous if a bondmaid or concubine rejected her master. She had to prove he was unworthy in combat, challenge, or wisdom. If she failed, she would be exiled or executed. Viloth whispered to herself, "Then I have 30 days to destroy this human." Later that night, the palace was quiet. Viloth sat in her personal chamber, now guarded not by her people, but by human soldiers. She could see them outside the window, talking and laughing like this was nothing. Her maids sat near the fire, silent. One of them neurophanally spoke, "Princess." He did not seem cruel. Vilo's voice was sharp. "He is the reason we're in this position." Another maid, Siri, asked, "What if he's not like the others? What if he's better?" Viloth stood. She had made her decision. No matter how kind Dax appeared, no matter how calm or noble his words sounded, she would not be owned. She would use those 30 moon cycles. She would gather knowledge, study his weaknesses, and when the time came, she would crush the law with her own hands, send the human back to his dirt world in shame. But deep inside, a voice whispered again, "Then why did he protect your name? Why did he choose mercy, not power?" Viloth closed her eyes and blocked out the thought. Tomorrow, they would leave the palace, and the real war would begin, not with swords, but with hearts, trust, and survival. The ship hummed softly as it moved through the stars, but inside the royal quarters, silence burned hotter than engines. Princess Viloth stood with her arms crossed. Watching the human through the glass wall, he sat in the command lounge, surrounded by his crew, speaking calmly, like none of this mattered. She hated him. She hated his quiet eyes, his strong hands. In that cursed moment, he chose mercy over pride. She would rather he laughed at her, mocked her like a conqueror. But no, he gave her dignity when he should have taken victory. And that made the chains feel heavier. Dax had assigned rooms for each of the maids and for her. They weren't prison cells. They were private chambers with soft beds, warm air, clean water. He even gave them a translator bracelet so they could speak freely. It made everything worse that night. Viloth gathered her handmaidens, 5 loyal girls who had grown up beside her. They sat in a circle, their eyes wide, afraid to speak until she did. "We are not his," Vilith said sharply. They nodded, though one looked down. "Then we must act like it," she added. "No smiles, no soft hearts, no weakness." One maid, Siri, whispered, "What if he is not the enemy?" Vilith's eyes flashed. "He is worse," she said. "He is confusion. And confusion kills kingdoms," but the next day tested her resolve. Dax walked into their common room, holding a tray of warm food. He placed it down and said, "There's extra in case you're hungry," then turned and walked out, not waiting for thanks. The food smelled like spices and meat, nothing like the dry root bread she had eaten all her life. One maid licked her lips. Vilith knocked the tray to the floor, scattering the food. "No one eats it," she ordered. But she saw how their eyes followed the falling pieces. Hunger. It was a quiet traitor. Later, Vilith followed Dax down the hall, unseen. She watched as he entered the engine bay to repair a coolant leak. The room was filled with hot steam, yet he worked alone, sweating, coughing, but determined, she expected to see pride on his face, but saw only pain. The skin on his back showed old scars, burns, cuts, deep wounds, not the scars of war. The scars of survival. A flash of memory hit her, her father once telling her, "Humans are clever, but wild, like fire." But fire, she now thought, also warms. She shook her head, angry for even thinking it. That evening something happened. One of the maids, Ari, was caught whispering to a human crewman. She was smiling, laughing, and worse, blushing. Vilith dragged her away and locked the chamber door. "You shame us," she said. Yari cried. "He was kind. He said I was more than a servant." Vilith slapped her. "Don't let kindness become your leash," she hissed. Later, alone in her room, Vilith stared at the reflection in her mirror. Not of a warrior, not of a princess, but of a girl who no longer knew who the enemy was. Suddenly, a siren blared through the ship. Red lights flashed. The engine slowed, and Dax's voice came over the intercom. "Everyone to the lower hold. We have incoming raiders within minutes." Vilith and her maids were escorted down by Dax himself. He looked tired but calm. "Stay here," he said. "I'll handle them." Then he left without armor, without backup, just that same plain sword. Vilith grabbed a screen to watch. She saw 5 raider ships closing in. The crew scrambled, but Dax boarded one of their fighters alone. He didn't wait for orders. He flew straight into the middle of the enemy, fired 2 perfect blasts, then crash-landed on the lead ship's hull. He leaped from the burning cockpit and cut open the raider ship with his blade like slicing fruit. The enemy fled, and Vilith watched in stunned silence as the man she hated limped back to his ship. With 2 captured pirates over his shoulder, he saved them again, and he didn't even ask for thanks. That night, Vilith sat alone. She stared at her own hands and whispered to herself, "Why doesn't he ever strike back?" She didn't know, but she was beginning to fear the answer, because if the human wasn't her enemy, then who was she fighting now? The palace of Eltraxis glittered under the twin moons, but behind its glowing walls, something dark moved in. Silence, jealous whispers, angry footsteps, cold eyes. The nobles were restless, and their fear had turned to fire. A human had killed the champion. A human now stood close to the princess, and worse. The handmaids had begun to smile in the dining hall that evening. Dax, the human, ate quietly at the edge of the royal table. The 6 handmaids sat near him, speaking softly, laughing at his Earth stories. He spoke gently, asked their names, learned their favorite foods. He even gave one of them a hand-carved wooden bird, something he had whittled from alien bark. The princess watched from the upper level, pretending not to look, but her heart thudded louder with every small laugh. From her maids, her people were warming to him, too fast, too easily, and in their warmth, she felt exposed in the shadows beyond the hall. Lord Kareth, brother to the dead champion, clenched his fists. He watched the human from behind a pillar, his golden robes trembling with quiet rage. That thing sat in the place meant for a Veltraxian noble, and now his law-bound position protected him unless... Later that night, a meeting took place in a forgotten chamber beneath the throne room. 3 nobles, 2 generals and 1 masked assassin stood in a circle. Lord Kareth spoke first. "The human is a poison," he hissed. "He must be removed before the people forget what purity is, but the law binds him to her," a general said. "Then we break the law," Kareth snapped, "or we make the princess do it." Their plan was cruel, not just to kill the human, but to frame him, to make it look like he attacked the princess. Once accused of royal harm, even ancient laws would be powerless to protect him, even his claim. 2. The maids would be stripped. The trap would be set during the starlight ceremony, a quiet event where the princess meditated alone in the Garden of Echoes. Only 1 guest would be allowed to join her, and tonight, they would arrange for that guest to be the human. Meanwhile, in the guest quarters, Dax stood on the balcony with Sorali, the first handmaid. She was teaching him a few words in her native tongue. Awkward sounds he kept butchering. He laughed. When he said something wrong, she smiled when he tried again. Below them, the garden shimmered with soft light. "Why do you smile so much?" she asked. "Even in a place like this?" Dax paused, then looked into the stars. "I've seen worse places," he said softly. "Places where no one talks. And the sky smells like death." Sorali watched him with wide eyes. "War?" she asked. "No," he said. "Slavery." He didn't explain more, but she understood. He had survived something dark, something cruel, and still, here he stood, smiling for others at that moment. A royal guard arrived. He bowed quickly. "The princess requests your presence in the Garden of Echoes." Dax hesitated. He looked to Sorali. "She never speaks to me," he whispered. "Go," she said. Placing a hand on his chest, but walk carefully, the garden was silent, glowing softly under pale blue moonlight. The air smelled of silver flowers and dreamroot vines, and there she stood, the princess, alone in the center. Wearing a simple robe, her silver hair falling loose down her back, he walked slowly toward her, unsure. "You asked for me?" he said, stopping a few steps away. "Yes," she replied, without turning. "I thought it was time I heard your voice," without Maids watching. A long pause stretched between them. Then she turned. Her eyes were softer tonight, her voice less sharp. "Why didn't you kill him slower?" she asked. "Who?" "My champion," Dax sighed. "Because I don't enjoy killing," he said, "and I only did it to survive." She stepped closer. "That's not weakness?" "No," he said. "That's what makes us human." Something in her chest shifted. She hated how those words sat inside her like a seed, growing, spreading. Then suddenly a sound, a rustle. Dax turned, fast, too fast, and caught the shadow before it struck. A poisoned blade clanged against his arm guard. He pushed the assassin back with a shout. "Princess, behind me!" He growled. 3 more shadows came, blades flashing, eyes glowing red. Dax stood in front of her, unarmed, but ready. The princess froze, heart racing, not from fear, but from realization. They were never after him. They were after her. By the time the guards arrived, 2 assassins were on the ground. 1 fled, 1 captured. Dax was bleeding, arm torn, but standing. The princess stood close, shaking for the first time. She touched him not out of duty, but out of truth. "You saved me," she whispered. He looked at her, tired, blood dripping from his knuckles. "Of course," he said, "you're not my enemy." And in that moment, something deep inside her finally broke, and something warmer began to rise. The sky above Veltraxis was quiet that night. The stars blinked gently, as if they were watching. The attack had passed, the wounds were cleaned, but something inside the princess had not healed. She stood alone on the highest balcony, the wind. Playing with her silver hair, her golden robe had been replaced with a simple dark cloak. The world below her glittered lights, towers, and honor all things she was born to rule. And yet, none of it brought her peace. Behind her, the door opened softly. She didn't need to turn. She felt his presence. The human Dax stepped quietly beside her. Saying nothing at first, his arm was bandaged, his shirt torn, and his eyes tired, but calm. "Why did you come?" she asked without looking. "You called," he replied simply. She finally turned, her voice shaking slightly. You saved my life. You're welcome, he said, half smiling. She stepped closer. Just enough for the wind to brush both of them. No one's ever taken a blade from me before, she admitted. Dax tilted his head. Not even your champion. She shook her head. He would have let me die. If it meant honor. They stood in silence, the wind whispering around them. Then the princess spoke again, voice low. I grew up behind walls, trained to lead, never to feel. She looked down at the city lights. I've watched executions. Without blinking, made decisions that ended wars. Dax didn't interrupt. He listened fully, truly, like no one ever had, she continued. But that night, when you stood in front of me, bleeding, arms out, ready to die, she closed her eyes. I felt something tear open inside me. Dax looked at her gently, and what was inside? She looked up at him. Fear, she whispered, not of you, but of myself. He stayed silent, letting her speak. Because I didn't want you to die, she said. Not for duty, not for law, it's just not at all. Her voice broke then. Just a little crack, and she turned away, hiding her face. No ruler is supposed to feel that, she said, ashamed. But I did. Dax stepped beside her and gently reached out. Not to hold, not to claim, but to offer his hand. Open, patient, warm. You're not just a ruler, he said softly. You're a woman, Veloth. She turned. Surprised he used her name. No title, no honorific, just her. He smiled, tired but kind, and maybe. You're allowed to feel something real. She looked at his hand, then at him slowly. She took it down below. The handmaids watched from the window of their chambers. Sorali whispered, They're not enemies anymore. Yari nodded. Something's changed. The scarred one who rarely spoke smiled softly. They're choosing each other now, back on the balcony. Veloth and Dax sat on the marble bench looking at the stars. She told him stories of her childhood, lonely halls, endless lessons and silence laughter. He told her of Earth, a planet of broken things, but also of music, fireflies, and grilled food. They laughed, not because the stories were funny, but because for once, someone truly listened. Then, after a long pause, Veloth turned to him and asked, What do you want from me? Dax thought for a moment, then spoke the truth. Nothing, he said. I don't want to own you. I just want you to stop being alone. Her breath caught. She blinked away, something wet from her eyes, and then, for the first time in her royal life, she leaned her head on someone's shoulder, not a servant, not a knight, not a mirror, but a human, and it felt right that night. The law still said she owned him, but the stars knew better, because something greater had happened, not by war, not by power, but by truth. Two hearts from different worlds had finally stopped fighting and started to understand. Asterisk, the royal court of Veltraxis had never been so full. Every noble, general, priest, and clan leader had come to witness the ceremony of correction. But no one was prepared for what it is. Would become Princess Vial stood alone in the center of the great marble floor. Her hands were chained in front of her, not with metal, but with glowing loorings. They didn't hurt her body, they humiliated her soul. Above her, the queen sat cold and silent on the throne. At her left stood the high judge, dressed in golden armor. At her right stood Rin, the human arms crossed, face unreadable. The room buzzed with whispers. She betrayed our laws. She ordered his death. She must pay. Vial said nothing, not because she was afraid, but because she had already fallen, and in that fall, she had seen everything. The high judge raised a staff, its top glowing with ancient symbols by royal law. Any royal who breaks a blood-bound oath must surrender status and title. He looked at Vial. Princess Vial of House Armatha. Do you deny ordering the death of the human warrior, Rin? She looked up, eyes steady, voice calm. No, she said. I gave the order, and I was wrong. Gasps echoed across the marble walls. The nobles leaned forward. Shocked, she didn't lie, didn't resist, she confessed. The judge blinked, confused. Do you understand what you've done? Yes, she said. I betrayed honor. But only because I didn't understand what it truly meant. She looked up at the crowd. from birth. I was told I was perfect, royal, above all, beyond question. I was wrong. She turned. To the queen, you told me to rule with pride, but pride made me blind, and in blindness, I tried to kill the only person who showed me truth. The queen's lips tightened. She said nothing, but her hands gripped the throne. The judge turned to the human. Rin of Earth, under Velcaron law, you may now choose her punishment. The room held its breath. Some expected blood, some expected exile, some hoped for mercy. But Rin stepped forward, slow and steady. He looked at Vile, not as a prisoner, not as a criminal, but as a person. I choose mercy, he said. The room erupted, yells, gasps, rage. Nobles stood, shouting, "This is weakness. This is insult." The queen raised her hand, and the room fell silent. She spoke with a voice like ice. "You choose mercy." "Yes," Rin replied, but not silence. He turned to the crowd. "Vile is no longer your princess, but she is still your mirror. She reflects everything you are afraid to see. Your system is broken," he continued, "not because your people are weak, because your rulers confuse fear with loyalty." He looked back at Vile. "She tried to kill me, but she also protected me, spoke truth in the garden, and stood beside me when no one else would." He faced the court once more. "She does not belong in a cage. She belongs where all true leaders begin, at the bottom, where they learn who they really are." The queen stood slowly. Her eyes burned with anger. "And something else, respect?" She looked at Vile. "You are no longer my heir. You are free to leave this palace as a commoner." Then coldly she added, "And if you return, it must be as someone greater than me." Vile bowed her head. I accept. Later that evening, outside the palace walls, skies had turned gold with sunset. Vile walked alone. No guards, no title, no riches. Behind her, the great gates closed, but beside her, Rin walked quietly, and behind them, her old maids followed, no longer servants. Just women who believed in something new. Tally smiled gently. "You fell today," she said, "but you fell forward." Vile looked at the road ahead. Her eyes didn't hold sorrow anymore, only fire. "I was born a princess," she said, "but I choose to live as a woman who will build her own crown," and far above them, the stars shifted, as if the universe itself had leaned in to listen, because this was not the fall of a princess. It was the rise of something greater, something stronger than law, deeper than blood, and brighter than any throne. It had been 3 full cycles since Princess Vial walked away from the Golden Palace. Since then, the people of Veltraxis had started to speak her name. Differently, not with fear, not with scorn, but with quiet respect, because she didn't vanish. She rebuilt, far from the capital, on the edge of the wildlands. A new settlement had risen. Small homes made of stone and starlight metal, clean water from recycled streams. No thrones, no courts, no nobles, just people. Working, living, learning together. At its heart stood a single, tall structure. Simple in shape but glowing with life, it was called the Flame House. Not a temple, not a fortress, but something new. Inside lived a human and 4 women, not slaves, not servants, but warriors, teachers, and equals. Rin stood in the training yard with Ina. The youngest handmaid, she now wore combat gear and held a staff taller than herself. "Again," Rin said, smiling. Ina spun and swung hard, laughing. "You're slower than you used to be?" "I'm giving you a chance," he replied. Stepping back and disarming her in one move, she groaned, then laughed again nearby. Arya was teaching young alien children how to track weather changes in the soil. Tali ran a food station for travelers, and Vile. She was no longer called princess. Now, they simply called her leader. She stood on a balcony overlooking the sunrise, a long coat over her armor, wind brushing strands of silver hair from her face. Rin joined her silently, holding 2 warm mugs. "You always get up before me," he said. "I always think the sky might change," she replied, sipping slowly. "It hasn't," he said. She smiled. "No. But we have." They stood together, not as master and subject, not even as legend and student, but as something real. He looked at her. "Do you ever miss the palace?" She thought for a long moment. "I miss the sound of marble under my Boots, she said, but not the weight that came with it. Rin nodded. And do you regret being mine? She turned to him sharply. I was never yours, Rin, she said firmly. He blinked, a little hurt. Then she stepped close. Placing a hand on his chest, I chose to stand beside you, not beneath you, not behind you, beside. He smiled, and that was enough. Far across the galaxy, the queen of Veltraxis sat in her aging throne. Her court had grown cold, divided. Some nobles still cursed Vile's name. Others sent their children to the Flame House to train. Even from the capital, the human's influence had reached deep. And in silence, the queen knew the old world was ending, and her daughter had not fallen. She had simply outgrown the cage they gave her. Back in the settlement, a caravan of strangers arrived. Rough travelers, exiles, alien widows, even lost children. They were not turned away.
Ow.
They were given food, clean clothes, and rest. One old man asked, "Who leads this place?" Tally pointed to Vile, who was helping a young girl fix her boots. The man blinked. That's the princess? Tally smiled. Not anymore, she said. Here, we don't follow blood. We follow strength of heart. Later that night, the Flame House gathered around the fire. The stars above were bright. Music played from a human maid. Box, Rin, and Vile sat side by side, their fingers touching gently. He looked at the glowing fire and whispered, "You know, none of this was supposed to happen." She leaned on his shoulder. "But it did," she said. "Because you didn't act like a conqueror." He looked at her. "And you didn't act like a trophy." They laughed, then grew quiet because they both knew this was bigger than love. This was a new story, one the galaxy wasn't ready for, but desperately needed. And so the legend spread, not of a warrior who claimed women by law, but of a man who was offered royalty and chose, instead, to earn loyalty. And of an ex-princess who lost her crown but gained something far more powerful, household built not by control but by courage. They were called concubines by law, but in truth they were his partners, his protectors, his equals, and their home. It became a beacon, a place where blood didn't decide worth, where strength meant compassion, and where a human taught an empire what it truly meant to rise.